Hello, my young grandchildren. I decided, since it's so hard for us to schedule times for me to read to you, that I'd start reading to you through recorded YouTube videos. So I'm going to begin today with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Let's see if that comes out okay. Right, there we go. This is the first book in this series by C.S. Lewis. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I'm going to skip over the dedication, and we'll go to chapter 1. Lucy looks into a wardrobe. Once, and forgive this music in the background, somebody's having a party next door, but maybe it'll add a little bit of atmosphere to the reading. Lucy looks into a wardrobe. Once there were 4 children. 4 children. Does that sound familiar? It's like your mommy and daddy and your 2 aunts and your Uncle John, unless I'm talking to Elias and Della, in which case it's your daddy and your 3 aunts. Once there were 4 children whose names were Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy. This story is about something that happened to them when they were sent away from London during the war. This is in World War II in London, England, because of air raids. They were sent into the house of an old professor who lived in the heart. Does that sound like me, an old professor? I'm getting pretty old and I'm a professor. Who lived in the heart of the country, 10 miles from the nearest railway station and 2 miles from the nearest post office. That's a long walk. He had no wife, and he lived in a very large house with a housekeeper named Mrs. Macready and 3 servants. Their names were Ivy, Margaret, and Betty, but they do not come into the story very much. He himself was a very old man with shaggy white hair. At least I don't have, I have shaggy hair, but at least not white yet, which grew over most of his face as well as on his head, and they liked him almost at once. But on the first evening when he came out to meet them at the front door, he was so odd-looking that Lucy, who was the youngest, was a little afraid of him, and Edmund, who was the next youngest, wanted to laugh and had to keep on pretending that he was blowing his nose to hide it. You ever do that? You ever blow your nose to try to hide the fact that you're laughing? Or maybe a fart? As soon as they had said goodnight to the professor and gone upstairs on the first night, the boys came into the girls' room and they all talked it over. "We have fallen on our feet, no mistake," said Peter. "This is going to be perfectly splendid. That old chap will let us do anything we like." "I think he's an old dear," said Susan. "Oh, come off it," said Edmund, who was tired and pretended not to be tired, which always made him bad-tempered. "Don't go on talking like that." "Like what?" said Susan. "And anyway, it's time you were in bed." "Trying to talk like mother," said Edmund. "And who are you to say when I'm to go to bed? Go to bed yourself." "Hadn't we all better go to bed?" said Lucy. "There's sure to be a row." In British English, a row means a fight or an argument. "There's sure to be a row if we're heard talking here." "No, there won't," said Peter. "I tell you, this is the sort of house where no one's going to mind what we do. And anyway, they won't hear us. It's about 10 minutes walk from here to that dining room, and any amount of stairs and passages in between." "What's that noise?" said Lucy suddenly. It was a far larger house than she had ever been in before, and the thought of all those passages and rows of doors leading into empty rooms was beginning to make her feel a little creepy. "Oh, it's only a bird, silly," said Edmund. "It's an owl," said Peter. "This is going to be a wonderful place for birds. I shall go to bed now. I say let's go and explore tomorrow. You might find anything in a place like this. Did you see those mountains as we came along? And the woods? There might be eagles, and there might be stags. There'll be hawks." "Badgers," said Lucy. "Foxes," said Edmund. "Rabbits," said Susan. But when the next morning came and there was a steady rain falling, so thick that when you looked out of the window you could see neither the mountains nor the woods nor even the stream in the garden, "Of course it would be raining," said Edmund. They had just finished their breakfast with the professor and were upstairs in the room that he had set apart for them. A long, low room with two windows looking in one direction and two in another. "Do stop grumbling, Ed," said Susan. "10 to 1, it'll clear up in an hour or so. And in the meantime, we're pretty well off. There's lots of wireless and lots of books." "Not for me," said Peter. "I'm going to explore in the house." Everyone agreed to this, and that was how the adventures began. It was a sort of house that you never seemed to come to the end of, and it was full of unexpected places. The first few doors they tried led only into spare bedrooms, as everyone had expected they would, but soon they came along to a very long room full of pictures, and they were found a suit of armor, and after that there was a room all hung with green, and with a harp in one corner. And then came 3 steps down and 5 steps up, and a little kind of upstairs hall, and a door that led out into a balcony, and then a whole series of rooms that led into each other and were lined with books, most of them very old books, and some bigger than a Bible in a church. And shortly after that, they looked into a room that was quite empty, except for one big wardrobe, the sort that has a looking glass in the door. There was nothing else in the room at all except a dead blue bottle in the windowsill. "Nothing there," said Peter, and they all trooped out again, all except Lucy. She stayed behind because she thought it'd be worthwhile trying the door of the wardrobe, even though she felt almost sure that it would be locked. To her surprise, it opened quite easily, and 2 mothballs dropped out. Looking into the inside, she saw several coats hung up, mostly long fur coats. There was nothing Lucy liked so much as the smell and the feel of fur. She immediately stepped into the wardrobe and got in among the coats and rubbed her face against them, leaving the door open, of course, because she knew that it was very foolish to shut oneself into any wardrobe. Soon she went in further and found that there was a second row of coats hanging up behind the first one. It was almost quite dark in there, and she kept her arms stretched out in front of her so as not to bump her face into the back of the wardrobe. She took a step further in, then 2 or 3 steps, always expecting to feel the woodwork against the tips of her fingers, but she could not feel it. This must simply be an enormous wardrobe, thought Lucy, going still further in and pushing the soft folds of the coats aside to make room for her. And then she noticed that there was something crunching under her feet. "I wonder, is that more mothballs?" she thought, stooping down to feel it with her hand. But instead of feeling the hard, smooth wood on the floor of the wardrobe, she felt something soft and powdery and extremely cold. "This is very odd," she said, and went on a step or 2 further. The next moment she found that what was rubbing against her face and hands was no longer soft fur, but something hard and rough and even prickly. "Why, it's just like the branches of trees," exclaimed Lucy. And then she saw that there was a light ahead of her. Not a few inches away there was the back, where the back of the wardrobe ought to have been, but a long ways off. Something cold and soft was falling on her. A moment later she found that she was standing in the middle of a wood at the night time with the snow under her feet and snowflakes falling through the air. Lucy felt a little frightened, but she felt very inquisitive and excited as well. She looked back over her shoulder, and there between the dark tree trunks she could still see the open doorway of the wardrobe and even catch a glimpse of the empty room from which she had set out. She had, of course, left the door open, for she knew it was a very silly thing to shut oneself into a wardrobe. It seemed to be still daylight there. "I can always get back if anything goes wrong," thought Lucy. She began to walk forward, crunch, crunch, through the snow, and through the wood toward the other light. In about 10 minutes she reached it and found it was a lamp post. As she stood looking at it, wondering why there was a lamp post in the middle of a wood, and wondering what to do next, she heard a pitter-patter of feet coming toward her. And soon after that there was a very strange person stepping out from the trees into the light of the lamppost. He was only a little taller than Lucy herself and carried over his head an umbrella, white with snow, and from the waist upward he was dressed like a man, but his legs were shaped like a goat's. The hair on them was glossy black, and instead of feet he had goat's hooves. He also had a tail, but Lucy did not notice this at first because it was neatly caught up over his arm that held the umbrella so as to keep it from treading in the snow. He had a red woolen muffler around his neck, and his skin was rather reddish too. He had a strange but pleasant little face, with a short pointed beard and curly hair, and out of the hair there stuck 2 horns, one on each side of his head. One of his hands, as I have said, held the umbrella. In the other arm he carried several brown paper parcels. With the parcels in the snow, it looked just as if he had been doing some of his Christmas shopping. He was a fawn, and when he saw Lucy, he gave such a start of surprise that he dropped all of his parcels. "Goodness gracious me!" exclaimed the fawn. And that is chapter 1. In chapter 2, we'll find out what Lucy found there in that strange place that she later finds out is called Narnia. Thank you, my lovely grandchildren, and any of your friends. I love you very much, and I'll read to you again tomorrow. God bless. Bye.